Hi, everybody. My name is Lauren Lovelace, and I'm delighted to welcome you to Forward Together, a conversation for Pride 2020. You can find us also at hashtag Pride 2020. I'm the Consul for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs at the U.S. Consulate General in Chennai, and I've had the wonderful opportunity to be part of Pride marches here in Chennai for the past couple of years. This year, we're going to take you on a virtual march forward together with some wonderful guests. This is part of a series of virtual programs that the U.S. Consulate General in Chennai has been developing since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. Specifically, we've had programs on health disinformation and misinformation, how to combat that with experts from Johns Hopkins University, a program on how entrepreneurs are pivoting to find innovation in the midst of COVID. We've had conversations about mental and physical health, including with the Banyan, and also how educational organizations are adapting. Today, I am so happy to be here to celebrate this June, the Pride event. For those of you who don't know the origins of Pride, on June 28th, 1969, members of the LGBT community in New York stood up and protested in what were known as the Stonewall Riots. And a year after that, members of the community took to the streets in a march to show their affiliation and support for the LGBTQ rights and equality. So that is why every June we're very honored and to remember that moment of people coming together in defense of their human rights and the human rights of others. The United States affirms that human rights are universal and that every individual is entitled to the same fundamental freedoms. All persons are created equal and have the same unalienable rights. No person's life or enjoyment of their rights should be threatened. I am so glad, so honored today to be joined by three panelists who share a true belief in human dignity, human rights, and the importance of this month, Pride Month, and in celebrating Pride all year long. First, I'd like to introduce you to Kalki Subramaniam. Kalki is a transgender activist, artist, actor, and poet. She's the founder of Sahodari Foundation, which uses art as a tool for expressions of gender justice for the transgender and non-binary people in India. She is an alumna of the International Visitor Leadership Program, and in 2010 she went on the program entitled Human Rights Advocacy and Awareness. We're so glad you're with us, Kalki. I'd also like to introduce everyone to Delfina. She's an activist, a theater artist, and a social worker who is connected to the Chennai-based organization Nirangal. This organization works in support of gender equality and rights. She has been associated with queer spaces in Chennai for many years, and she's passionate about creating meaningful community conversations through art. And also, we have with us Priya Menon, who is the features editor of the Times of India here in Chennai. Priya has worked as a journalist for more than 2 decades and has focused her work on the LGBT community and welfare. She was part of a Foreign Press Center event, a tour, that was arranged by the U.S. Department of State called Developing Narrative, LGBTQ Rights and Issues in 2012. And she's received several awards for her work, including a Social Justice Journalism Award just last year. So with that, I want to march forward together. I'd love to say hello and welcome to our 3-star panelists. And before I begin, I would like to let our viewers know that there will be an interactive question and answer session at the end of the discussion. I'd ask that you please type your questions into comments boxes that appear on either side of your screen or below your screen, depending on your device, and we'll have our guests answer as many as we can. I know that we starting a little bit late. We're packing decades of experience into a one-hour conversation, so let's get started. We're so glad you're with us. Forward together. My first question is going to be for Ms. Kalki Subramaniam. Kalki, you've been an outspoken voice in the community for a long time, working with social, political, legal, economic rights working on the rights of transgender people in India through your organization, Sahodari Foundation. Can you tell us about that journey and perhaps what is your biggest challenge thus far? Thank you. Kalki, you're on mute. And if you can just unmute that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting for this panel, and happy Pride in spite of all the challenges that we have got through the COVID-19 situation. I still wish everyone a happy Pride. And talking about the challenges that there's a lot of challenges that a transgender person faces, and in our contemporary society, not only in India, but around the world, there has been a severe discrimination and stigma for transgender and LGBTQI people in general. But I would like to give my perspective from the transgender community, for the transgender community's perspective. I think for us, it actually starts right from our childhood. It starts at school with bullying and discrimination, and based on our effeminate, if boys are effeminate and if girls are masculine, then we're always a target of bullying. And then I think at home also we have the same problem, but in a different way. That is, our gender expressions are not accepted at home, and we constantly become the victim of domestic violence, or sometimes even because of these gender expressions, our families reject us. And that is the case with all over the world. I, as a trans activist, one of the biggest challenges I face is on how to make a transgender kid, or a non-binary kid, or a gender diverse kid be accepted in the family of his or her biological family. How can she be integrated? How can she be accepted as a part of the family? That is the biggest challenge. And I think that can be happening only when the parents are open-minded, when we educate the parents on LGBTQI inclusion and why trans kids are trans kids and why they are so normal and nothing is wrong with them. And that's the biggest challenge that we face with the families.
That's a great answer. And actually, you've foreseen some of my future questions. I'm going to turn to Delfina now and actually follow up on that question, Delfina. We were speaking earlier about bullying and your work on college campuses, and how can educators and family members, members of the community, take the kind of advocacy role that Delfina was, that Kalki was speaking about? How can they become advocates? Just check.
Sure, Lawrence. That's an excellent question, because I think the greatest hope for change lies in the youngsters in the next generation, where we have this engagement on how we can take forward these conversations for leading to a better future. So in the work that we have done with colleges have been some of the most successful activities that we have done. Because what we typically do with a college or an educational institute is to invite the students, and often the faculty also, if they are willing to join them, to an interactive discussion. With the methodology that we have for education, we find that most students have been given a lot of information from the textbook, and they have received a lot of information and literature, but they really have not had a chance to ask someone. They have not met someone from the LGBTIQ community in person. So it makes a great difference when we go there as community members and have these conversations. So we have been able to engage across a variety of colleges, from the government colleges to the private ones, from the city ones to the suburban and the rural areas. And we also want to leverage on provisions that already exist. For example, the University Grants Commission, UGC, which is the governing body of colleges in India, has clearly given a rule against discrimination or harassment or bullying based on gender identity or sexual orientation. But often college authorities are not aware of it, and we point out that this is something we have to do just to comply with the law of the land. but beyond the law as well, we try to share personal stories and use creative arts to have more involved conversation, if I can say.
Thank you so much, Delfina, for that answer. I'm thinking, we'll talk maybe a bit about resources that are available to some of our viewers today, later in the conversation, and also how to move beyond, posted signs and guidelines and into actual practice with some of the things that you were speaking about. I'll move now to Priya Menon. Priya, you're a well-known editor or journalist, features editor for one of the biggest newspapers in South Asia, and you've been following this issue of LGBTQ rights, also focusing on discrimination, challenges to equality for a long time. This is in the midst, obviously, of also some landmark cases that we've been seeing. What would you say what changes have you seen in this space as a journalist and as an advocate?
Okay, Lauren. Now, as you said, that I've been covering these issues for more than 2 decades. It started off as just another story. But when my editor asked me to do an article on the homosexual population in the city and the challenges they face, and that's when I realized that the population is so silent, so hidden, so invisible, and because they are facing persecution of all kinds, from being bullied in schools and colleges to sexual harassment to being disowned by their families. And that's how I began writing about the issue. So when I started in '99, I needed the help of activists such as Menon of Sahodari to get people to talk to me, to trust me, to narrate their stories without prejudice. And from there, I think we've come like a really long way, because in the last 20 years, quite a lot has happened in the legal sphere. In 2009, we had the Delhi High Court passing a landmark judgment decriminalizing homosexuality. And in 2013, the Supreme Court reversed the verdict. But people, allies, community members didn't give up. They fought inside the court and outside. And finally, in 2018, Supreme Court of India read down Section 377 decriminalizing gay sex. And socially also there has been a change, because after the Delhi High Court judgment in 2009, Chennai witnessed its first Pride March. After that, we have had a lot of cultural events, panel discussions, rainbow film festivals. We have had parents come out to speak about their children. And even at the family level, I think one of the things which really remains in my memory is that after the Section 377 was read down, there was a party to celebrate. And there I saw a middle-aged woman dancing joyously with her young gay son. So for me, that kind of encapsulates everything that is gone. So we still have a long way to go, but yeah, we are on the right path.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think this is getting back to what Kalki and Delfina were also mentioning, was the importance of that human interaction, and just demonstrating that we're all people, we're all individuals, and who come with different stories, different skills, talents, different lives. And when you have the opportunity to interact with them, whether it's in a school or college environment or in a home environment, and be honest, then you can see some positive changes happening. We're already getting some questions coming in from our viewers, and I would encourage people to type in your questions. I'm going to ask a few more of my own. We have 2 of our panelists today are working specifically in the arts. So I'd like to turn to Delfina and Kalki and ask them, why art? You both are working in organizations that you chose to use art as a medium to move toward your social justice beliefs and movements. So I'll turn first to Kalki, just in general, how did you come to choose art as the vehicle? And then Delfina, I'd love to hear some words about the way that you use improvisational theater, improv, to talk about LGBTQ equality. And I should be saying LGBTQIA plus equality. And thank you for the viewer that reminded me of that. Thanks.
I think choosing art as an expression was very natural, and it was not a decision. I think right from my childhood, when nobody was there to listen to my gender dysphoria problems, I think I chose to write it on a piece of paper, and I chose to draw it using a pencil and paint. So that is how I could naturally express my inner desires through drawing and painting, and my pain through poetry. So that is how I started to use it during my teenage years. And it really helped. It really helped me to get over certain wounds, get over certain fears, and then build a hope in itself. I mean, build a hope in me. Very much it helped. And I think when I became finished my college, I started a magazine called Sahodari for a trans community, writing poetry, putting up my art on our transgender community. And I mean, right now, after these years, I think art is such a powerful tool that we are full time using it in Sahodari for different purposes, for livelihood, for anti-violence, resistance against violence, rape, discrimination, stigma, and bullying. And particularly, we also use art as a way to communicate with children as well.
It's true. It's so accessible. So I think that's. Can you say a bit about that? Just the accessibility of art. We're here in Chennai, we're in Tamil Nadu, which has one of the most renowned cultural heritages in the world. People travel from all over the world. I've had family and friends travel here for music season, for dance season. I've met and seen the most superstars in the world cultural scene come here exactly because of the love that the culture has for that this society has for culture. So can you talk a bit about how culture also gives access, if you were saying from young people to some older folks?
I think for us, for the transgender community, this art and culture is not actually for the pleasure or making someone happy. So for us, it is actually our life, and I mean, it is the way we are, and it is the way we express ourselves. Our life is actually so much weaved in art, right from our expression of our femininity, our dance, our way of dressing, our makeup, everything is art. So it is just that people do not see this, and they see our expressions and our way of dressing and makeup as something awkward and unacceptable. That is one of the prejudices that the transgender community has been facing. Why aren't you like other women? Why aren't you normal? Why aren't you dressing up normal? Why are you applying too much makeup? And all this is very prejudiced notions that are forced upon women, which are also forced upon trans women and trans people too in general. But coming about using art as a powerful tool, I would say India is already a very, very diverse and very rich land of art and culture. As much as we have many different languages, we have many different art forms, and in each language and culture and in every state, we have different kinds of arts and culture, of course. So for me, I use a fusion of Western art as well as Indian art, keeping our method as Western, but keeping our hearts as Indian. We bring out the stories through art, through expression of color, and through for livelihood and for gender expressions. Yes.
Thank you, Kalki. Turning now to Delfina. Delfina, you practice an art called improvisational theater that I love. And I would like to yes and you into asking, how do you do that as an artist? Also, how do you use that as a pedagogical tool, as an educational tool for in your work? Thanks.
Sure, Ansa. I think that's wonderful. And I also wanted to just remark that Kalki was talking about the Western forms used in Indian settings, and that completely resonates with me because I do playback theater, which is a form of improvisational theater that was founded by Jonathan Fox and Joe Salas in New York in the United States. But I have never been to the United States. I got trained here in Chennai, and we are working with the local communities. We perform primarily in English or in Tamil, although we do performances in English when necessary. And okay, the idea of playback theater is that we go to the stage and then ask the audience or the team members to share a life experience, a feeling, or a story, and have it recreated on the spot. The value of it is that it breaks people from this idea of scripted conversations. We live today in an extremely polarized culture. You're either for J.K. Rowling or you're for the trans community. You're either for this or you're for that. You're either for this party or you're for that party. And I do understand where these emotions and feelings come from. But if we have to take a way forward, it cannot be resolved by mere ideological debates. And so I can tell you, for example, when I went for my first playback theatre workshop, one of the activities we had was based on sociometry, where we were asked to say, like, stand in a line based on how many friends we have. And at that time, I hardly had any friends. And I stood on one end. But now I think I have a few friends whom I really find meaningful connection with. And so when we do this type of visualization exercises, we try to get a better insight into where we are. And when we do actually perform this theater, for example, it's not about preaching. It's not about telling you how to accept transgender people. For example, I have seen people come in the audience who have been harassed or who have been made fun of by a certain transgender woman in a tribe. Of course, it's unfair to generalize it and say that all transgender women are like that. But no matter what statistics we give, what data points we give, this person is going to carry this feeling of hatred against a transgender person or the transgender community unless we give them a chance to express their story, say, yes, we understand, we acknowledge, and then we move on. I think that's what is possible in playback theatre. We get a mixed audience, people come from diverse backgrounds, and we engage with the community, with the transphobic people as well. And when this person shares their story and they feel validated, then when the other person shares their story, they are willing to listen. That's the value I find in playback theatre.
Thank you, Delfina. That's a great answer, and I'd love to see some of the theater that you're doing in that space. And in terms of you never having been to the United States, we've got to get you over to New York to visit some of the homes of improv there and in Chicago, but also to take part in our annual Pride March there, which is pretty amazing experience. I want to ask a question to Priya about how traditional and social media are covering LGBTQ issues and maybe areas that you see for improvement or change or to build upon. One issue that we were talking about earlier that I thought was very interesting was that line between being an advocate, and we were having some questions from our viewers about how to be an ally, how to be an advocate, but also protecting privacy rights. It's one thing to say, you believe in the human dignity and human rights, but another to depict someone in their personal life, which is private, personal. So as a journalist and advocate, I'd like to hear from you a bit about where you see traditional and social media going in this space, some changes that we might want to make, and also how to do the best job possible in terms of balancing between the advocacy, but also the respect for privacy.
Yeah, Lauren. So I think there'll be like two parts to my answer. So as far as traditional media is concerned, I will stick to talking about English print media because that's what I'm versatile with and familiar with. I think the English print media has done a fairly good job of covering issues and staying with the issue over the years to highlight the concerns of the community. So I think that is one important thing, that you need to stay with an issue. It's not enough like you write one story about bullying and leave it. You need to come back to it again and again and keep highlighting things till that is served. And the other thing comes to privacy, respecting the privacy of an individual. So as a journalist, I can talk about what I do, my colleagues do. It is when you talk to a person, the first thing that you ask, you're very, very clear about is whether they wish to be named or not, whether they want their personal details divulged in the article or not, whether they want their photograph out there or not. And we respect that completely. To write about an issue, you just need their stories. You don't need to have their real names out there. So that is one thing that we stick to. And even with photographs, as I mentioned, it is only with permission that you use it. The focus is always on the issue, and it is highlighted and narrated through the personal lives while ensuring there is complete privacy. And social media, on the other hand, is a totally different ballgame. So I think social media and privacy issues go way beyond even covering LGBTQIA issues. So that is something which, you know, one individual doesn't have a control over. For example, like we were talking earlier, if there's a Pride March, I can check with the person I'm, you know, clicking a picture of whether they want it used or not. But there is everybody out there with a smartphone. What they use and what they put up is not within my control. So but the social media, it has its reach also. It has a very wide reach. Things go up instantly. So it is a double-edged sword, I would say.
Thank you. And I got a question from a viewer, which was, how does the United States view the transgender community? Does the transgender community also face discrimination in the United States? And I would say that, you know, in the United States also, there's a very strong desire to build education, to increase education, to increase the number of advocates in support of the transgender community. We've recently had a Supreme Court ruling that got a lot of media coverage, which Priya will know well, which was supporting the rights of all people to be able to work irrespective of their gender or sexual orientation. We have protections under the law, but I think that in terms of discrimination, it's still, you know, it's still a real issue. So thank you for that question. Priya, just following up on that, though, you've been, you know, you have covered major Supreme Court decisions, both in the United States and I know in India with the ruling on Section 377 last year. Do you have any thoughts related to where India might be going, or where the community might be going with respect to those legal decisions?
Okay, so the battle, let me say, to the legal battle to scrap 377 was a long one with ups and downs, but in 2018 we finally achieved that, and 377 has been read down, and gay sex has been decriminalized. But as you say, it's just the beginning. You need several more steps, and I you know, repeatedly say I think we are on the right path, because there are several other things which have happened after that, even in the legal sphere. For example, in April last year, I think, the Madras High Court directed the Tamil Nadu government to ban sex selection surgeries on intersex infants and children. Now, that's like a very big landmark ruling, and I hope other states follow suit, because this alters the lives, changes the lives of a community which is even less you know, spoken about. Now, the LGBT community, yes, you know, people do, right? People know who a homosexual person is or a bisexual is, but with intersex, there is still a lot of confusion, not just among people, but even the medical fraternity. So a ruling like this is very progressive. So I think that with time, one by one, we will be addressing. I'm very hopeful and positive about it, that things will be addressed.
Thank you. With respect to just, definitions, I had a good question from one of our viewers. And I invite any of the panelists who wish to answer this one, which please let me know. Very few people acknowledge what the A in LGBTQIA+ actually stands for. How can Pride be more inclusive for those who identify on the asexuality spectrum? Delfina, Kalki, Priya, do any of you have any thoughts on that, and just the inclusivity that is desired on behalf of the community? How can we ensure, how can it be as inclusive as possible? Kalki, just need you to unmute. I think you have an answer. Thanks.
Yeah, I would like to talk about asexual people's issues and rights. I think I am, to a certain extent, I am asexual too. At times, it is an area, it's a space where there is no dialogue happening. There are not many people who talk about asexuality and asexual people's rights. And I don't think there is too many resources in the Indian media about asexual people and asexual issues too. So but it's very much a part of the rainbow. It's definitely a part of the LGBTQI. And it has to be their rights, and it's our rights too. Everyone has to be included. And I think asexual people too face a lot of problems. You see, like judging them and bullying them if for not being attracted to anyone. They are bullied too. And at home, family is a big problem too. Because you're always seen from a very narrow-minded perspective that if you're a man, you should be attracted to another woman, and if you're a woman, should be attracted to another man. And asexual people are attracted to nobody. Maybe in a certain point of time, they may never be attracted to anybody. And that's very normal. The problem is we don't have enough resources and education on asexual people's rights and issues and life. And that has been that has definitely been a big space that we Indian activists don't actually discuss about. And also, I think we need many voices from that community to come out and talk. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kalki. I'm going to turn to Priya.
So I want to tell you that, of late, at least the discourse around asexuality has begun in the public domain and public sphere, because there is this organization, I think it's called Indian ACEs, started by Dr. Pragati Singh, and they hold events, they hold counseling, they have an online presence. So they've begun creating a certain discussion in the public sphere and creating awareness about it, and I've also written about it. The media is reporting on it. So I think it's just beginning, because the concept is just like catching on, and with more activists like her coming forward, I think people will get more aware and sensitized to it.
Thank you so much. We're getting a lot of good questions coming in now, even better than the ones that I've had. I love this one. Images and representation of the LGBTQIA community in film and media entertainment is often very degrading. Is it possible to ban such misrepresentation? So this is talking about a censorship board. Movies are powerful mediums to get messages across. We can talk about that censorship and how censorship might be. Well, I'll just let you do. I've got my own thoughts about censorship as a First Amendment person, but I would like to hear from you on that idea. But also, well, let's start there. Thoughts on the way that the community is depicted in mass media, and what can be done to challenge these depictions.
I think sensitization and awareness is key to this, because in films, it's not just, it happens even with women, the way women are portrayed. So I think sensitization, awareness, and maybe workshops with people, maybe that's like the way forward. But yeah, I do agree that, in certain movies and certain, I wouldn't say in every film or every media thing, but yes, the way the community is represented may not often be right, but that is why I think allies, activists, and members of the film community maybe need to sit down, have workshops. So maybe the other activists, Delfina, Kalki, could tell me what's the way forward.
I'm just going to jump in really quick. I just want to do a shout out also for one of my colleagues at the U.S. Consulate, Ratna Mukherjee, who's been working on a project called Women Shaping the Narrative. And it's about having, and I think that we could have LGBTQIA individuals also shaping the narrative. How do you change the way that you are depicted in a way that also has a marketability? And so what we've seen in terms of women shaping the narrative is that when women become the producers, the cinematographers, the directors, the script writers, there's an audience for that. And I think what we've seen in the United States in some of our mainstream media, and I'll think for instance, RuPaul's Drag Race has won numerous mainstream awards at this point. RuPaul says he doesn't want that. At all, but he's not looking for Emmys, but still just the fact that has been able to enter into the mainstream in the United States is very interesting. Can you speak a bit about anyone else on shaping the narrative? And I want to hear from Kalki, specifically, you've been dissatisfied with the way entertainment in general have depicted transgenders. work that you've done, which is so interesting that you talk about on your website, train transgender individuals to create content through short videos that depict them in ways that they.
Yeah. Let me see. Okay. I think for the past 30 years, and more, the trans community, the queer community has been on constant battle with the media, especially with the films, and to a certain extent with the print media too. But till today, we are still fighting with the film people, because the narratives that they bring, this is mostly, for many, many decades, it has been completely baseless, completely wrong, completely unacceptable. In a way that many of the words used in the popular films that have a transgender character, which is very demeaning or in a very irrespectful way depicted, these names are actually thrown at us when we walk on the streets, when we study at school, when we work in the workplace. These words are thrown at us, and it hurts us so much. So what is a laughing stock for a feature film is people who are dark, people who are trans, people who are visually or mentally challenged. These people have been a laughing stock. And transgender people have been one of the biggest laughing stocks, and as well as gay people as well. But I think trans people have been very, very big, have been affected so much. Until I think a few years ago, there were many films, but I think we are changing it through different efforts. I think I acted in a film called Nartiki, which is India's first complete narrative of a transgender person's life. It's a biography. And the very popular film Kanchana, and many, many beautiful films are there in Tamil and in other languages too. Talking about my initiative, I think because the films were projecting wrong information, and because the print media was bringing out stories from their perspective and not from our perspective, that is when we actually started to tell our stories. I received a scholarship from Goa, an organization in Goa, on a community media. And then they gave me a free camera, an Olympus brand camera, to tell the stories of our community. So once I came here, I trained another 10 transgender women, and we all I gave this camera to them for 2 to 3 days in the places that they can live, they can shoot and talk and do whatever. So taking back all the footage from the 10 people, we made short little films, beautiful films. Priya has actually done an amazing story on that 10 years ago. And these films are still available on YouTube. And these are the first, some of the first narratives from the community itself, using social media and technology for the empowerment and for the voice of the transgender. And I use poetry and performance art. And poetry as a literature is not much reachable and appreciated. It's applicable only to a certain section of people who are very educated and very much interested in literature. But I got my poetry into visual films, made my poetry into films, and then I got a good reach. People began to notice it, people began to hear my stories in audio and video, and it had a wide reach. So I think images have a great impact on people, and that is why we have always used technology to fuse with art as well as with the video images. And now we are using this artificial intelligence and augmented reality into our artwork, because I think augmented reality has a great opportunity to tell your stories just beyond painting. For example, I have this beautiful painting from our artist. You see, this is a transgender woman, transgender character, and this is the hand of a man, and this is the hand of a woman. It could be parents, it could be. This is a trans character. So she can be a student, she can be a sex worker, she can be a beggar or anybody, but she needs protection, you see. It could be from the world, it could be from her family, it could be from her parents or anybody. This painting was actually done by an artist called Abhinaya. And you know, she just passed away last week. That's a tragedy. She just passed away last week. We're not even sure how she died, but it's another story actually.
I'm sorry to hear that, but thank you so much. I'm so glad that you got to share her work, and that you know that's what art does. That continues to have resonance long after we're gone. One thing that we are very much hoping to do at the Consulate, and this is based on a conversation with Salma, is to translate the works of Dr. Maya Angelou, who's a great American poet who speaks about racism, discrimination, women's rights. She speaks about domestic violence, gender-based violence, and she speaks very beautifully about this through her poetry. We're planning to translate these works into Tamil, and we're hoping that that will be made available. And I think that it's a part of an American Studies and Translation project that we are moving through the American Center in Chennai, and something we'd be very interested in looking at great works of art, literature, poetry in the American studies medium, and maybe having that translated into some non-English regional language here in South India. I saw that Delfina had, I think, a point on maybe on changing the narrative, and then Priya, you had also raised your hand, and we've got about 10 more minutes, and and just on that, we're also getting some more questions coming in. So I just ask you to keep your answers a tiny bit shorter.
Certainly, I think Kalki and Priya have pretty much covered the creative ways in which we can do the narrative. The point I wanted to make is I'm a little skeptical about the value of bans, because I think there is something like the First Amendment in the United States or the Article 21 in Indian Constitution, free speech protections, based on which we have been advocating for our right to say what we want. And I think pushing for a ban might be a double-edged sword which could work against us. So I would rather think, just like what Kalki was talking, we can create more visibility for these good films than focus on banning the bad ones.
That's a good First Amendment answer there. Thank you, Delfina. I personally agree. Priya, turning to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to briefly add a comment. When it comes to filmmaking, what I've noticed is that with the Rainbow Film Festivals, a lot of people from the community are visually coming out with their own stories, making their own films, and that could like serve as like pointers for the mainstream media. It's just that it never hits the theaters. So that's just something that I wanted to add. But I've seen a lot of good films coming from the community.
All right, thank you for that. I have another question. I have a few other questions. One is about how to move forward a curriculum within the educational system. And the question doesn't say if, I'm not sure if the viewer is talking about a primary school curriculum or a secondary school curriculum or a college curriculum, but I know that all of you have worked in some ways in education. Why not have a curriculum in our education system to spread awareness? Have any of you worked within the government of Tamil Nadu school system? Yeah, Delfina, please, thank you.
Sure. I think the first thing I want to observe is that in Tamil Nadu, I think we have had these conversations even with the state education syllabus, and there has been some progress made. I think there are some transgender narratives included in the school textbooks, and even in terms of representation of men and women and ideas of family, there has been some better representation in Tamil Nadu compared to what was before. But of course, a lot more needs to be done. And I think we need to work both on the curriculum in terms of what content can be added to the books, but also equally important on engaging in the curriculum in teachers' training, because unless the teachers are sensitized and aware of this, I think there is an issue with how the curriculum is delivered in the classroom.
Exactly. So one issue is building understanding and awareness, and then we come back to that issue of bullying that Kalki mentioned at the beginning. And I know, Priya, you've written a piece for the Times of India where you were talking about a UNESCO report that was looking at the the really horrible impact of bullying on society, on the individuals who are affected, but also just in society in terms of people's ability to have confidence, speak freely, feel that they are included. So can you maybe speak a bit to that, Priya, and any other thoughts you have on education?
Yeah, sure. So in the course of my years of reporting, I've come across a lot of kids who have been bullied. In fact, I think just a year ago, I was at a meeting with some activists, and this 12th standard boy stood up and spoke about how he was on the verge of committing suicide when he actually got counseling from an NGO. So I think the kind of impact that it has on young children is terrible. Because in our society, we don't generally talk about sex or sexuality or gender orientation to our parents. You know, there's no way that you can confide, you know, it's very difficult. So, and if you do not have a support network, it's even more difficult. And I think people, activists like Kalki have done good work, because she actually came out with a handbook or manual for teachers, how to handle transgender kids. How do you realize, you know, who, you know, what their problems are? How do you tackle it? So I think things like that would definitely work. UGC's come out, like Delfina mentioned, they've come out with some guidelines and regulations regarding harassment and bullying in colleges. But I think we need to address it at the school level. Because at that point, I think children are also confused about their gender identity, sexual orientation, and that's when they need the most help. So I think NGOs, allies, families, everybody kind of needs to get together, and having a school counselor who's sensitized to these issues, I think is a must. Schools often have counselors, but are they trained to deal with children who have these issues? So that I think is very, very important, and we could just begin from there. And sensitization of teachers and teaching staff, that's another thing.
Something that I've seen also at the Pride marches here in Chennai, they're just the most welcoming spaces. They're welcoming for young people, they're welcoming for children, they're welcoming for old people. It's really a joyous, you know, very wonderful opportunity to be together with the community, to learn, and just to be, you know, people having fun, people being you know, happy, people speaking to their rights and their love of life. So I think that that's something I would encourage people to, if you've never been on a Pride March, I'd really encourage our viewers to consider that. You don't have to be a member of the LGBT community. You can be an ally and an advocate who walks alongside them. Every year, last year, I had the chance to speak to a man. He said 10 years ago, he remembered being on the sidelines as the march went by, and knowing that he was gay, you know, but not feeling comfortable. And he said now, you know, it's so wonderful 10 years later how he feels comfortable to be able to be out walking arm in arm with people. So I just wanted to say that that's probably a good way here in Chennai that people can also come in touch with the community, in addition to the great work that, in addition to reading your articles, Priya, and the great organizations that Kalki and Delfina are working with. I want to turn now to the question of the day, and one of the reasons that we're having this conversation virtually on Facebook Live and not in the beautiful American Center on Gemini Circle. The reason is, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic, and we've had, as I mentioned at the top, several virtual programs. One of the most powerful, I thought, was with the head of the Banyan, talking about mental health, and another with PCVC talking about gender-based violence. And I'm wondering if I can ask you, Kalki, the impact that you feel that COVID-19 has had on the LGBTQIA community, both positive and negative. I mean, they're negative, you know, very, very possibly, but also if there are any positives coming out of that, I'd love to hear you share that. And I'm going to ask the group, we have about 4 more minutes. So at the end of that, I'm going to ask for some brief reflections. Thanks, Kalki.
So much negatives than positives, because really because their livelihood is in a big question.
I think, Kalki, your audio is breaking out. So I'm going to hold for a minute. Okay, wait, here you are. We've got you again. Can you start? Would you mind starting, Kalki, just from the top? Your audio was breaking out there for a moment for us.
Oh, okay. Am I audible now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, great. I think the COVID-19 situation, the pandemic situation, has affected deeply the transgender community, because majority of the community people, their livelihood have been on daily basis. Like majority of them are doing sex work and were also beggars, doing begging, and many of them were housemaids and working, a few of them working in the corporates and in metro stations and all that. But I think everything has come to a standstill. And trans people, majority of them depend on others. They live with other trans women. So they don't have a family support to take care of ourselves for weeks or months. So that has been a major setback, that we had to depend on others for our basic needs. And even though many NGOs are helping and many activists are coming forward and many other people are coming forward, including the government, but still, it was just for 2 months and 3 months, and it seems that the pandemic will go on for another 3 months in Chennai. And I don't know, there might be a saturation point when we will not receive any help at all. So that is what makes me afraid that how are we going to face the peak of this? How do we face this challenge of no help? So I think the greatest challenge is that when you don't receive help from anywhere, how do we survive? How do we help ourselves, and how do we support other transgender people?
Thank you for that. Oh, wait, actually, we've got 2 more minutes. We've got 2 more minutes total, according to Venkatesh, who's running this great conversation with us. So if I would go ahead with one more point.
Yeah, one more point I'd like to add is, when we talk about films, I think you abruptly interrupted and I wasn't able to answer it fully. And I think what I wanted to really say when we talk about films is that we need to make films. The transgender community has to tell our stories through feature films. And that is what is so important. We need to be the camera persons, we need to be the editors, screenwriters, we need to be the directors and the producers, of course. Right now, economically, we are not empowered, but I see in the future, we will definitely be empowered.
Thank you for reclaiming your time. Sorry if I interrupted you earlier. I get overzealous in my moderation. Thank you so much, Kalki, for those very good points. One thing that we were talking about in terms of the impact of COVID is obviously for everybody is just not having as much privacy as maybe we would like to have. And so I say that with recognition that we maybe have viewers here who are watching who are not having as much privacy as they would like. There are resources that have been mentioned today at the Banyan, at PCVC, at the organizations that Delfina and Kalki represent. So I would just say, reach out to them also. And this is a difficult time for everyone. So it's important to look for support. It's important to seek your inner resilience, but also to seek, if you need it, to seek help from others. So I wanted to be sure to express that. I want to now, we had a question that we've had a viewer who's asked the question a couple times and reposted. So I'm going to have a last minute here. Just in a couple sentences, I'd like each of you to answer this question. I think it's important to Pride, and it's important to this month, and it's important to the community in general. Because this person keeps reposting it, I know it's also a heartfelt question, and they'd like an answer. How important is an ally's role? And more specifically, what measures can an ally take to be more inclusive? So if you could each share a few concrete, 1 or 2 concrete things that someone can do to be more of an ally and to support our community so that we can move forward together. I'll start with Delfina. Thank you.
Thank you, Lawrence. I think one of the challenges we have with allies is that there are some people with very good intentions, but who want to be identified as allies and stand with a little bit of space between the community and say, here I am to support you. And this creates a lot of confusion. And so I think what maybe would be a more meaningful strategy is for us, if we want to be an ally of the community, is to start reflecting on what gender and sexuality means in our own lives and find common threads in how it connects to the lived reality of the LGBTIQ community.
Thank you, Delfina, and also just thank you for the wonderful work that you do, especially with young people, with the arts community, how you move your message through the arts. It's really been wonderful to get to know you over the course of the past 3 years, and I wish you all the best and happy Pride to you. Thanks for joining us today. Turning now to Kalki. Kalki, how can allies be more inclusive? What are some concrete steps that people can take to be better allies for the community?
I think to be a better ally, first of all, one needs to be completely educated. And particularly, I see academicians as a very big ally. That's where we could actually make a big change. And media. Media could be a very, very big ally for us. I think whoever is representing media, whoever is narrating our stories, has to actually bring out the right information. There are many interns and many journalists writing about us, but from a very cis perspective, from a very narrow-minded perspective, from a very heterosexual perspective. If you need to be an ally, you need to first, we don't need sympathy, we need empathy. That's what is my take.
A great answer, as I would have expected. Thank you so much, Kalki, for joining us and for your fierce work. We really, it's amazing to watch the work that you do, and especially I think that the example that you provided with the short films that you have, that you're training people to make. We have been involved with the Chennai Photo Biennale, and I hope that that's a platform maybe that into the future would support that type of work with you as well. I'm going to turn now, you were talking about media and the importance of media advocates. We're so lucky to have one here amongst our panelists today. Priya, Menon, last words from you, please, as a panelist on what can be done to, what people can do to be more inclusive as allies. Thanks.
Yeah, so an ally in it by itself implies that, you know, you're empathetic to the cause. And I think the role of an ally is very, very important. And it necessarily doesn't mean that you have to be in a really, you know, powerful position to help. But you can do everything in your own personal life. If you're an HR manager, ensure your workplace is more inclusive. If you're an educator, ensure that your school and teaching staff is sensitized to deal with children. If you are a media person like me, choose your words with care, narrate stories with empathy and with conviction. So I think the role of an ally is very important, and everybody can do something in their lives to ensure that all of us have equal access to healthcare, to education, to lead a life with dignity.
Thank you so much. It was wonderfully said. I want to thank again all of our panelists. I want to thank Kalki and Priya and Delfina for their time. I want to thank my team, Ratna Mukherjee. I want to thank Chitra Shankar, Mogador, Venkatesh Dipti from the Consulate, who share this commitment that all people are created equal and should be treated equally. I did want to mention at the end that the U.S. Consulate General in Chennai is pleased to have partnered with the Asian College of Journalism to develop a textbook, a handbook on countering disinformation. And that is important for the type of narratives, how to counter false narratives, some of the things that Kalki and Priya and Delfina were speaking about today. That handbook is available in Tamil, Kannada, and Malayalam. It's available on the U.S. Consulate General's website, and we'd invite you to join and learn more about that. And we also hope that we'll see you again on future virtual programs. On behalf of the U.S. Consulate General in Chennai, the U.S. Mission to India, and my wonderful team, I thank you and happy Pride.